ruthless in our message.
Okay, thank you. Meg Hillier, briefly.
Thank you. Prime Minister, you said that a number of the allegations that are made about Dominic Cummings were false. You were with him for 6 hours. Did you see the evidence to prove that?
Meg, I don't want to
yes
go
or no,
into,
Prime Minister. It's a simple question. Yes, or did you see the evidence?
I don't want to go into much more than I've said.
It's a simple question. Did you see the evidence?
If it pleases you, I will say yes, I did. But I don't want to.
Okay, well, that's fine. Prime Minister, you saw the evidence. Would you agree that it would be a good idea for the Cabinet Secretary to see that, or for it to be published, and then this problem might be off your table?
Well, I think actually that it would not be doing my job if I were now to shuffle this problem into the hands of officials who, believe me, Meg, are, as I think the public would want, working flat out to deal with coronavirus. I think everybody's had I know that there's a great political interest in this. I'm not certain that, and I understand that completely, and I totally understand public indignation. I totally understand that, but I do think that as I understand things, and I've said what I've said about the whole business, I think it would be much better if we could now move on and focus on the next steps.
We must try avoid repeating ourselves. Yvette Cooper.
Well, I don't know how, but I mean, if I can ask the same question, what else can I do?
Thank you, Prime Minister. I have to say it is extremely surprising that you won't provide that evidence to the Cabinet Secretary or have any independent verification of it. But let me ask you about your instructions now to parents who either have COVID or have the symptoms of COVID, who won't know how seriously they're going to get it, and who have no local childcare available. Is the message to those parents now the one from Jenny Harries to stay at home unless there's a risk to life, and if you do get ill, contact the community hubs? Or is it the message from the Transport Secretary and the Communities Secretary to be able to travel to wherever you have a support network? In the words of Robert Jenrick this morning, if you don't have ready access to childcare, then you can do as Dominic Cummings did. Which is it?
Well, I'm not certain, Yvette, that there's as much of a discrepancy between those two bits of advice as you suggest. And I think what Jenny was trying to say was that if you've got exceptional difficulties with childcare, then you should take account of them.
Okay, but we're not talking about exceptional difficulties with childcare. We're talking about the very normal difficulties with childcare. A survey from Mumsnet today found that a quarter of parents said they didn't have access to local childcare when they had COVID and were in exactly the same circumstances as Dominic Cummings. A third of them say they'd be more likely to break the rules now. So if you are trying to tackle local outbreaks and prevent them spreading, you need to be giving clear advice to parents. Yeah. And what is it? Because it is not clear to me from listening to Jenny Harries and to Robert Jenrick what that advice to parents who are in Dominic Cummings' situation.
The clear advice is to stay at home unless you absolutely have to go to work to do your job. If you have exceptional problems with childcare, then that may cause you to vary your arrangements, and that's clear. We're also saying from tomorrow that, and this is an important development, that there is a new test and trace operation which will change people's lives and which will require a great deal of thought and compliance, but which I think will be worth it for the whole nation. And the fundamental advice remains absolutely unchanged, which is wash your hands, observe social distancing, and self-isolate if you have symptoms and get a test.
I'm asking specifically about your advice to parents who have COVID. Advice to parents you are not giving. The reason that you are not giving, the reason you are ducking it, the reason you're trying to.
I'm not ducking it. I'm not ducking it. Actually, I've just said that I agree. I don't think that you're actually
travel across the country, even though it may mean them having to go into a hospital somewhere else where they may see further infections. Do you want them to do that? Or do you want them to stay put when they don't have local childcare, like around a quarter of parents?
Yvette, I think you'd have to look at each individual case, and there were particular circumstances that my advisor explained. I think what Jenny Harris was trying to say was that where there are exceptional difficulties, then people needed to take account of them. And other than that, I don't really know what I can add.
No, here's the problem, Prime Minister. The reason you are ducking this is because the reason you're not giving people a straight answer is because you are trying to protect Dominic Cummings. The reason you've sent all of your ministers out to say fudgy things and unclear things is because you are trying not to incriminate Dominic Cummings and you don't want to apologise for him. The problem is that means you are putting your political concerns ahead of clear public health messages to parents who have coronavirus. And the consequence of that is putting your political concerns above the national interest. You are trashing, in the words
Can we have
of public
a question, please?
If I may say so, I don't wish to be.
Let me put this to you as a precise question. On the way into this crisis, you were criticised for getting a whole series of messages, decisions wrong on shaking hands, on business as usual, on letting Cheltenham go ahead.
Can we have a question, please?
A series of those things, and 40,000 people are dead. We need you to get this right now. So can you tell us, you have a choice between protecting Dominic Cummings and putting the national interest first. Which will it be, Prime Minister?
Well, I think my choice is the choice that the British people will want us all to make, Yvette, and that is, as far as we possibly can, to lay aside party political point scoring and to put the national interest first, and to be very clear with the British public about what we want to do and how we want to take this country forward. And we come now to an important juncture. We're moving to step 2 of our roadmap. And I think that this conversation has, to my mind, illuminated why it's so important for us to move on and be very clear with the British public about how we want to deal with that and how we want to make progress. And frankly, when they hear nothing but politicians squabbling and bickering, it's no wonder that they feel confused and bewildered. It is much, much more important that we stress the vital messages, stay at home if you can, go to work if you must. That will change, obviously, for some sectors as June the 1st approaches, and then June the 15th when more non-essential retail comes on. We must have social distancing. It's absolutely vital, and really those messages need to be pumped out the whole time by you, Yvette, just as much as me.
Prime Minister, we would love to have clearer messages from you. I need you to give those clearer messages.
We've had a long time, Yvette. We must move on. Are there any other further questions? I'm obliged to ask the committee. You want to ask about the Prime Minister's advisor, otherwise we're moving on. Simon Hall, very brief, please.
Thank you. Agree entirely with the seriousness of the situation, but I don't think anybody can understand why Mr. Cummings is so pivotal to moving this country forward dealing with coronavirus. This is now a distraction. People are very annoyed, Prime Minister. Is that on your radar? Well,
I think, Simon, you've made that point, I think, several times now. And my respectful point to you is, yes, I do understand people's feelings. I do understand why people feel such indignation about the whole business and the pain of the whole business of the lockdown. But I really also think that what they want now is for us to focus on them and their needs, rather than on a political ding-dong about what one advisor may or may not have done. And to repeat an important point, which I don't think you've acknowledged, a lot of the allegations that were made about that advisor were simply not correct. And I don't think that point has been sufficiently acknowledged.
We're moving on to science and health, unless there's anybody wants to carry on with that subject. Right, we're moving on to science and health. Greg Clark. We're now quite far behind, I'm afraid. You're muted, Greg.
Okay. Is that better?
Yeah.
Good. Prime Minister, good afternoon. It's good to see you back. You get a lot of scientific advice. Do you see it yourself?
I don't, Greg, thank you. I don't, good to see you too. I don't actually read the scientific papers except in exceptional circumstances, but what I do get is the direct digest from SAGE, which, as you know, is chaired by Sir Patrick Vallance and co-chaired by Chris Whitty. And they give me the cream of that advice.
Okay, so you get a summary. From reading that advice, can you explain why we have in this country a policy of 2 meters social distancing when the World Health Organization recommends 1 meter, and countries that have a very good track record in controlling COVID, countries like Hong Kong, Singapore, Australia, and Germany, specify either 1 meter or 1.5 meters?
Well, look, Greg, you're making a very important point, and one that I've made myself many times in the course of the debates that we've had. What was the advice from SAGE? And the advice from SAGE remains at the moment that there's a very considerable reduction in risk at 2 meters. My own hope, and this is where I hope we can get, my own hope is that as we make progress in getting the virus down, in reducing the incidence, that we will be able to reduce that distance, and which I think will be particularly valuable on transport and clearly in the hospitality sector.
But the virus is international. The virus doesn't recognise international boundaries. Science is international. Have you asked your advisors why our specification should be the highest in the world?
I have, actually.
What was the answer?
And their answer is that that's what they feel is the right interval for us to protect. That's why there's a difference. And we rely and have done throughout on the guidance we get from our advisors, and that is what they think is appropriate at the moment. But Greg, that may evolve. As you know, SAGE has changed its advice, for instance, on face coverings.
Advice needs to be interrogated and discussed, Prime Minister. But perhaps you could ask SAGE to review the 2 meter rule in good time for shops and other places to consider their practice on the 15th of June and publish what they say, because this has a massive impact on whether many workplaces can open. Would you make that commitment?
I can not only make that commitment, Greg. I can tell you that I have already done just that. So I hope that we'll make progress.
Promising, good. When contact tracing is underway, if you're phoned up and told to stay at home because you've come into contact with an infected person, is staying at home compulsory, or can people use their judgment?
No, we want people to understand that this is something that is really not just good for them, because they'll stop spreading the disease to those they might love and know, but also good for the whole.
Is it compulsory or is it advisory?
We intend to make it absolutely clear to people that they must stay at home. But let me be clear. Matt will be.
What do you mean by must? Is it a law or is it advice?
We will be asking people to stay at home. If they don't follow that advice, what we will be saying is we will consider what sanctions may be necessary, but financial sanctions or fines or whatever. But what,
of course, by the police or by civil authorities?
Well, whatever is appropriate. But what I would say. Monday, whatever I know, because we're not bringing. To begin with, we're asking people to do it as a matter of course. If they're contacted by an NHS tracker tracer, then you should. If you're contacted by an NHS tracer and you're told that you've been for more than 15 minutes, less than 2 meters away from somebody who has tested positive for coronavirus, then you should self-isolate. That's what we're saying. And
you should advise.
You should. Now,
Mr. Clark.
If people don't, as I say, we will consider bringing in financial sanctions, fines.
Last question, Mr. Clark.
Let me just ask one wrap-up, if I may, Bernard. Do you have to talk to the contact tracer? Have you got an obligation to do that? And would it not be a good thing to be able to offer anyone that is contacted an immediate test with rapid results, as conforms to international best practice, such as in South Korea, rather than advising them, as it seems, to lock themselves away for 14 days, not knowing whether they've tested positive?
Sorry, let's be clear. Sorry, but thank you, Greg. Important point. Clearly, if you are asked to self-isolate and you develop coronavirus symptoms, you will of course have a test. The difficulty.
But what if you don't have symptoms?
Difficulty with testing people who are asymptomatic is that they may very well have the disease but not test positive for it for a long time, and that can run right the way through, I'm afraid, for quite a long period. So that's the difficulty we have there, Greg. Just too many false negatives. Now, a lot of people will listen to this and
so
say,
scientific advice, not capacity, that is driving that. You've had advice that you shouldn't do that on scientific grounds rather than capacity.
That's completely right. And a lot of people listening to this will say, and this is a big change, right? And so people need to listen to this and understand. They will say, hang on a mo, you're telling me that if somebody from NHS Test and Trace contacts me and says, I'm a contact of somebody who has coronavirus, I've got to self-isolate for 14 days. I'm afraid the answer to that is yes. Clearly, if they have a test and they test, and if they have symptoms and they test positive, then they're out after, then the self-isolation ends after 7 days. But I'm afraid if you're asymptomatic, you don't have symptoms, then you've got to do it. Now, people will say this is a grave imposition. And again, to get back to the conversation we've been having throughout this session, it is a huge imposition, but it will be on a very small minority of the population, a very small minority of the population. And I would just say to everybody that it's worth it, because that is the way that other countries, that is the tool that other countries have used to unlock the prison, to make sure that we can go forward. And so that captivity for a tiny minority for a short time will allow us gradually to release 66 million people from the current situation. So I do think it's the right way forward.
Thank
you very much. I think my time's up.
Jeremy Hunt.
Thank you, Prime Minister, and good afternoon. Today's announcement on track and trace could be an absolute game changer, but it's only possible because we have massively ramped up testing. So I'd like to start by asking why it took until April to introduce the 100,000 test target, even though our first confirmed case was in January.
Well, Jeremy, I think, as you know, the difficulty we faced when this virus, we had several difficulties. First of all, this was a totally new virus, and it had some properties that everybody was quite slow to recognize across the world. For instance, it is possible to transmit coronavirus when you are pre-symptomatic, when you don't have symptoms, and I don't think people understood that to begin with.
What was the reason for the delay, Prime Minister?
Our testing operation, as you know, began much earlier. We did have a test, track and trace operation, but unfortunately, we did not have the capacity in Public Health England, to be absolutely blunt. We didn't have the enzymes, we didn't have the test kits, we just didn't have the volume, nor did we have enough experienced trackers ready to mount the kind of operation that they did in some other Eastern Asian countries, for instance. And I think the brutal reality, Jeremy, is that this country did not learn the lessons of SARS or MERS, and we didn't have a test operation ready to go on the scale that we needed. We now have that, and as you'll appreciate, during the peak of the epidemic, when numbers of cases were running very high indeed, test, track and trace would not have been appropriate. It's now the appropriate solution.
Prime Minister, my question was really why we waited from January to April before expanding that capacity. But one of the consequences of that is that we couldn't test everyone who was being discharged from hospitals. Did you get any advice that doing that meant we could risk spreading the virus into care homes?
No, and as you know, a huge effort was made to try to protect care homes, and don't forget that as Chris Hobson of NHS Providers has said, every discharge from the NHS into care homes was made by clinicians who, and in no case was this done when people were suspected of being coronavirus victims. And actually, the number of discharges from the NHS into care homes went down by 40% from January to March. So it's just not true that there was some concerted effort to move people out of NHS beds into care homes. That's just not right.
No, but there is obviously risk if you can't test people when they leave hospital. And countries like Germany insisted that care homes quarantine people arriving from hospital, and we didn't. Now, just on to today's announcement, which is so important. You said you want a world-beating system, and most people think that Korea and Taiwan are amongst the places that have done this best. But in those countries, the test results are returned within 24 hours. With us, it's 48 hours, twice as long. And that means that the people who are contacted because they've been near someone with coronavirus have longer to spread the virus to others. So why don't we get our test results back in 24 hours?
Well, Jeremy, it's a very good question. And actually, we are reducing the time, the delay on getting your test results back. And I really pay tribute to Dido Harding and her team. The UK is now testing more people than any other country in Europe. And she has she's got a staff now of 40,000 people, 7,500 clinicians, 25,000 trackers in all. And they are rapidly trying to accelerate the turnaround time. I will send you the latest figures after this meeting, but we are reducing the delay the whole time. And
I understand that.
48 hours, a chunk of them are already within 24 hours, and that chunk is growing.
I understand that, but I've got 3 care homes just in my constituency that have had to wait more than a week to get their results back. And isn't the truth that actually turnaround time is just as important as the volume of tests? So why don't you as Prime Minister just say, this is a public health emergency, I want all test results back within 24 hours, because that would galvanize the system and make the test and trace system work much more effectively.
Well, we have done that, and that's exactly what Dido.
What you've introduced a 24-hour target.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. And that's her goal. And if you talk to both to Dido and to Chris Whitty, the CMO, the Chief Medical Officer, they would agree strongly with you that the quicker the turnaround time, the faster you can check whether someone actually has a coronavirus, the more effective your test, track and trace operation is going to be.
And when have you told them they have to meet that 24-hour target by?
I'm not going to give you a deadline right now, Jeremy, because I've been forbidden from announcing any more targets and deadlines.
But give me a sense. Is it in the next week, or is it going to be, in the next month? Give me a sense. Are we talking weeks or months?
It's going to be as soon as possible.
Weeks or months, Prime Minister.
Perhaps I could just say one thing that might be of use to Jeremy and to the committee, which is to understand where we are with test and trace. Tomorrow, and we must be absolutely clear about this, I'm not going to pretend to you, Jeremy, or to the committee, that what we will have tomorrow will be valuable, it will be useful, it will be a very important tool in our fight against coronavirus, but it will be getting steadily better to become a truly world-beating test and trace operation in the course of the next days as we go through June. This has gone from a complete standing start to a huge operation. And so, Jeremy, I don't want to give you an exact deadline for when we'll get down to 24 hours, but that is plainly the ambition. We'll do it as soon as we can.
Okay, a final brief question, Prime Minister. like us, Canada, Israel, and Singapore all have a lot of agency workers working in their care homes. And they've banned them from working in more than one care home because they don't want agency workers to spread the virus from care home to care home. Will you look at doing the same thing here?
Not only that, Jeremy, but we've done that already, because what we've said, if you look at our care home action plan, what we said was we were going to stop the movement, the migration of workers from one care home to the next, because plainly that was what was happening. You were seeing outbreak after outbreak because staff were moving from, particularly in chains of care homes, from one to the next. So that has been put a stop to. And that's why the number of outbreaks in care homes has gone down from in the hundreds a few weeks ago to 7 or 8 a day today. And that's why the number of deaths in care homes has now come down so dramatically. I'm not going to pretend that this has been anything other than a tragedy, an absolute tragedy, what has happened in care homes. But the care home action plan, including the measure that you've just described, has already had a very, very powerful impact.
Can I just interject, Prime Minister, that what is causing the delays to tests? How are you resolving those problems, and who's in charge of implementing that resolution?
Okay, the delays to testing are caused very largely by difficulties in the labs with actually producing the results in a speedy and effective way. And we've had problems with some labs I'm not going to mention by name that haven't just, things have fallen over in their operations. They haven't been able to get the results back fast enough. And so we're working on all sorts of solutions, including batch testing and other faster methods of testing that I'm sure the committee are already familiar with, pregnancy style tests and so on, in order to speed it up. So there've been a host of technical problems, but notwithstanding those problems, the UK is now testing capacity is now up at about 100.
That's been very helpful. We'll stop there. That's very helpful.
And we're going to go up to 200.
Clive Betts.
Thank you, Bernard. Prime Minister, good afternoon. You mentioned that this whole system of testing, tracking and tracing was from a standing start. But already in this country at the beginning, we have a lot of highly qualified professionals called directors of public health, who are experts in the field of contacting people, tracking and tracing. Why were so many of them last week saying that their involvement in designing this system had been minimal?
Well, Clive, that's one of the issues that I've raised repeatedly, and has been raised repeatedly with me, a strong desire to have much more local expertise and use all the local knowledge far more effectively. And one of the reasons why we decided at the heart of Dido's operation is the chief executive of Leeds Council. I'm sure you know who is helping to make sure that we're not trying to reinvent the wheel here. We are using local experts, people who understand their communities, as well as recruiting more trackers from around the country.
Well, I'll say it seems to many people that the involvement locally was almost an afterthought. So we're now going to have this grand national system. Department of Health's involved, the Public Health England are involved. We've got phone banks, we've got an app eventually. How will the local arrangements that you just described, the involvement of Directors of Public Health, fit into that? And who in the end will be accountable for the whole system?
Well, I will be accountable for everything, but the person.
So we can blame you for everything that goes wrong, then, Prime Minister.
In my experience, it's very hard to avoid blame, and quite right too. But look, Dido is leading it, and she's doing a very good job. And I thank her and her team. They got a standing start, 40,000 people.
Well, let's go on a little bit, because I think the government have now announced that there will be every area will have an outbreak control plan, an outbreak control committee who will be responsible for that plan. Precisely, who are these committees? Who's going to form them? And if there are going to be local lockdown measures, which have been referred to recently, will it be the local committees that decide on those and impose them?
Thanks very much, Clive. No, what we will be, obviously we'll be working with the local outbreak committees and those responsible for dealing with whatever happens locally. Will clearly go through the local resilience forums which are leading on this, but there will be strong directional effort and control from the joint biosecurity centre that we are now setting up. And you know, members of the committee will be familiar with this change. We're moving to we're going to have much more observation and detailed knowledge of what's happening.
So those local committees are responsible to the biodiversity committee at national level.
That's it.
That's how it works.
That's it. And the joint biodiversity biosecurity centre will be looking at, for instance, the other day you saw there was an outbreak in Weston-super-Mare, and we moved very quickly to close things down there to try to sort it out. That's the kind of whack-a-mole tactics that we're going to use as we keep driving the virus down and keep reducing the incidence. It's very, very important that we have a very sensitive test, track and trace operation in order to cope with local outbreaks.
Right, can I just follow? It refers to a question that Greg Clark asked earlier. I understand there probably are long-standing sanctions for people who don't isolate with a disease which is notifiable under the public health rules. Directors of Public Health seem to understand that. But what is missing, Prime Minister, is that if someone is infected and then is asked for information about the people they've been in contact with, I understand there are absolutely no sanctions if they refuse to provide that information. Isn't that a major hole in the system that needs addressing?
Prime Minister.
Thanks, Bernard and Clive. Yes, you're totally right that this is something that we're relying on people's public spiritedness, on their willingness to cooperate and defeat the disease. And I have to say that in other areas of very delicate, very sensitive areas where people do need to give details of their contacts, such as HIV transmission, it does work. So, Clive, I am confident that it will work in this case.
But if it doesn't work, will you look at sanctions then? Because this is maybe something that we need to do.
Well, obviously, we're relying very much on the common sense of the public to recognise the extreme seriousness of this. This is our way out. This is our way of defeating the virus, getting our country back on its feet. And I think people will want to work together.
I think most people will, Prime Minister. It's those that won't that we have to deal with, surely.
Correct. Clive, you're correct. And that's why I said what I said earlier on, I think, to Greg, that we would, of course, we would keep sanctions on the table. And as we develop the system, we will review constantly what kind of cooperation compliance we're getting.
Thanks.
Thank you, Bernard.
Point well made, Clive. Thank you. Prime Minister, can you just explain who Dido is? Who is she? What is her role? Just for the public to understand.
Dido Harding is a senior executive in the NHS who's crossed over to work full time now on bringing together across departmentally and across all the institutions involved, whether Public Health England or the care homes or whoever it happens to be, the test and trace operation. So she is responsible for NHS test and trace. And that's what's being launched this evening by Matt, and that's what goes live tomorrow.
Very good. We will now move on to reopening of schools. Robert Halfon.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Thank you, Chair. Can you assure all those parents, children, teachers and support staff who are watching today that the phased school opening on the 1st of June is absolutely safe, is of minimal risk, and that all the required testing, tracking and tracing will be given to teacher, staff and pupils, and there will be the required PPE where it is needed? And is it still the government plan to have all primary school years going back a month before the summer holidays?
Okay, Rob, well, there's some very, very important questions. Just to remind everybody, because not everybody would have clocked this yet, What we want from June the 1st is for primary schools to begin gradually to go back. So early years, reception year 1 and year 6. We know we can do it in a safe, socially distanced way. That's what we want. We accept that not everybody will necessarily go back on day 1, but we do expect people to return to school in those class groups. We do believe it's safe, provided everybody remembers the guidelines that we've set out, and everybody understands the crucial things you've got to do, particularly maintaining social distance and washing your hands. Those are the absolutely, and of course, self-isolating if you've got symptoms. Those are the crucial things that you've got to do. They can't be stressed often enough. And on your point about the rest of primary school, Rob, we want to keep that under review. We'd like to do it if we can. It depends on our national success in keeping the disease under control and driving that incidence down. And so we'll continue to review it in accordance with the scientific advice.
Mr. Halfon.
Thank you. We know that roughly 86% of vulnerable pupils are not at school and learning. And a survey of 900 heads in England suggested that around 700,000 state school pupils are not doing any schoolwork. There is a potential decade of educational poverty in the offing and possibly a safeguarding crisis. So will you support a catch-up premium supported by a volunteer army of retired teachers, graduates and charities, alongside opening of summer schools to help those left behind children catch up with their education and get much needed pastoral and well-being support?
Yes, I think, Rob, the short answer is I want to support any measures we can to level up. You know what we want to do in this government, and there's no doubt that there's a huge social injustice taking place at the moment because some kids are going to have better access to tutoring, to schooling at home, and other kids aren't going to get nearly as much, and that's not fair. That's one of the reasons why we need to get schools back. I think that's something that people in this country do understand. They do understand the basic social injustice there. You've got lots of good ideas there. The catch-up fund, making a particular effort to tackle the needs of disadvantaged kids. Don't forget that we're already making sure that children from disadvantaged backgrounds get laptops and tablets and routers where necessary, but I agree with you that there's a lot more that needs to be done.
Mr. Halfon.
Thank you. On apprenticeships, the starts have fallen by 7% on last year. We know that significant amount of apprentices are being furloughed or being made redundant. We're in danger of destroying our dream of building an apprenticeship a nation. Will you consider introducing an apprentice guarantee, offering every young person from the age of 16 to 25 a guaranteed apprenticeship, providing they get the qualifications from level 2 right up to degree level?
Well, Rob, I'm going to, all I will say to you is that I totally agree that apprenticeships going to play a huge part in getting people back onto the jobs market and getting them into work. And we will look at anything to help people. It's going to be a difficult time, but there are also great opportunities to give people skills now that they perhaps need and haven't been getting over the last few years. So we're going to focus on that as well.
But why not give them an apprenticeship guarantee? Because there will be a lot of people young people needing skills and jobs in the aftermath of the coronavirus. Well,
we will be doing absolutely everything we can to get people into jobs, and I will look at the idea of an apprenticeship guarantee. I suppose it's something that we'd have to work with employers to deliver. We'd have to think about the funding of that. But this is a government that has done some pretty astonishing and creative things with helping business in the last few months, and that's the kind of thing we could well consider. We are going to need to take exceptional steps to help our young people into work, and we will.
Finally, I've got
very brief, please.
Yeah, I've got my question, which have been guaranteed by you, Mr. Chair, that Cambridge University is become the first university to announce it's moving all its lectures online until summer 2021. Yet another university, Nottingham Trent, which is an award-winning university, is going to have blended mix of campus and online learning. Should higher education follow the example of Cambridge or Nottingham Trent? And can I just finally ask, should every student who's working in the NHS during the coronavirus have their tuition fees reimbursed this academic year at the very least?
Okay, Rob, you're piling on the some questions here. On your final one, I will come back to you on NHS students, or students who are working in the NHS. I'm sorry. We'll give you an answer as soon as we possibly can. On your point about Cambridge and Nottingham Trent University, obviously I think it's a matter for universities, but clearly I think the implication of your question is that face-to-face tuition is preferable, right? Well, I hope that all universities understand that and see that that's also important for their students and for social justice.
Thank you. Mr. Stephen Timms.
Thank you, Chair. Can I pick up that social justice point and ask a question about a couple in my constituency? They both work, they have 2 children. The husband's employer didn't put him on the job retention scheme, so he has 0 income. His wife is still working, but her income is less than their household rent. They have leave to remain in the UK, but no recourse to public funds, so they can't get any help at all. Isn't it wrong that a hard-working, law-abiding family like that is being forced by the current arrangements into destitution?
Hang on, Stephen. Why don't they? Why aren't they eligible for universal credit or for employment support allowance or any of the other?
It's a very good question. It's because they have no recourse to public funds. That's a condition that's attached to their leave to remain. They've been here for years. Their children have been born in the UK. But because for a 10-year period, they have this no recourse to public funds, at the moment, they can get no help at all.
Where are they actually from?
The couple I'm thinking of are from Pakistan, but it applies to anyone from outside the UK.
And they can't get furloughed, obviously not. Well, look, I'm going to have to come back to you on that, Stephen, because clearly they're people who've worked hard for this country, who live and work here, should have support of one kind or another. But you've raised a very, very important point. If the condition of their leave to remain is they should have no recourse to public funds. I will find out how many there are in that position, and we will see what we can do to help.
I'll be most grateful. The Children's Society said, I think 2 weeks ago, there are at least 100,000 children in families in exactly that position. They've got leave to remain, they're law-abiding, they're hardworking, they've got no recourse to public funds, and many of them can get no help at all at the moment. So I'll be very grateful.
I'll be very interested.
We look forward to a letter on this matter, Prime Minister. Mr. Timms.
You will get it.
Thank you very much. Can I raise a separate point, really picking up Robert's point about a proposed apprenticeship guarantee? I just want to point to the success of the Future Jobs Fund after the last crash in supporting young people back to work. I wondered whether you'd agree that we are going to need some pretty radical measures to tackle unemployment after the crisis, particularly to support young people who everybody, I think, is suggesting are going to find it particularly hard to get into work.
Yes, and that's why I think the idea of Rob's idea, this apprenticeship guarantee, is so attractive, because what we have done is we put our arms around every worker and help them keep their job, but businesses, they may need support in the coming months as they get back on their feet in taking people on, and so we'll need to think about how to help them. And at the same time, look, let's face it, this country does have skills deficits. We do have a productivity gap still. This might be the moment, Stephen, when we really start to try to tackle that and address use this crisis to address some of these issues. So I can assure you that the Chancellor and I and everybody we're looking at all this stuff very closely, and we'll be wanting to come forward in June, early July, with much more about how we get employment going again, how we get the economy restarted. But for now, it's very important that we focus on defeating this virus.
Okay. After 2010, the last crash, we had an ambitious large-scale employment support program. Of course, for the last few years, unemployment has been low. Employment support has been much more modest. I wonder if you'd recognise that we are going to need, again, and perhaps this is what you've just been suggesting, we are going to need, again, a much bigger employment support program after the crisis than we've had in the last few years.
I think it's very likely, Stephen, and we've done some things that I think have been right and have been overdue. I mean, I think lifting LHA, local housing allowance, up to 30% again of rent of market of the local market. I think that was the right thing to do. Forgive me. That helps a lot of people. What we've done with universal credit's also been important, but this is going to be the challenge now is going to be about getting the economy moving again and creating jobs, high-class jobs, good jobs for the whole country. And forgive me, my mantra remains that the way to do that is with fantastic infrastructure, better education, better skills, and technology. We're going to stick ruthlessly to that. And indeed, just so everybody, I said this before to Conservative colleagues, but I'll say it to everybody on this committee, we're going to double down on that programme. We want to intensify that.
It's going to require as well, I think, support for people to get into employment, as well as making sure there are jobs there. And the point made forcefully to our committee recently has been it takes a good year to get an employment support programme into its stride. So I wonder whether you'd agree it really is very urgent to get a programme planned and underway.
Yes, though don't forget, Stephen, what HMRC has already done, what the government has already done at incredible speed in getting the furlough programme going. Nobody thought we could do that thing so fast, and they did it very effectively. So I think one of the ways in which this country is getting easier, as it were, to help, where people are getting easier, we do have so much more data. We understand where people are, what the problems are. One of the things that we're using to tackle this epidemic. So I hope that we'll be able to be very fast in dealing with the economic issues on the spot as we are trying to deal with the health and the medical issues right now.
Thank you. We move on now. Thank you very much. Caroline Notes. You're self-muted at the moment, Caroline. I've
unmuted. We've heard about the phased school opening, and that's going to happen at a similar time to the retail sector opening up, where we know nearly 60% of employees are women. Whose advice have you taken, Prime Minister, on how that phasing and the availability of childcare might impact women's ability to get back to work?
Well, as I say, I'm pleased that I think your question, Caroline, is directed at whether or not we've got a sufficiently female representation at the top of government, helping us to inform these decisions. And I really think we have. You look at the head of policy in number 10 is Munira Mirza. The election manifesto on which we both fought successfully was written by two women, and the most important appointments we've made just in the last couple of weeks, whether it's Dido Harding or Kate Bingham, who's running the vaccines operation, have also been women. So
okay, can I just interrupt you there, Prime Minister? The EHRC have said that they've been ignored by Downing Street and that you've not listened to any of their advice on the unequal impact of COVID. Which experts are you listening to on the impact this virus has had, particularly on female employment? Well,
there's a general study being conducted across Whitehall about the inequalities aspects of COVID, and that will be reporting to me. There's a study on the medical inequalities that Professor Fenton is producing, and that should report by the end of this month.
The Institute for Fiscal Studies said that women are more likely to be furloughed, or they're more likely to be in sectors where they've been shut down. They're also worried about the availability of childcare and their employers making decisions for the future based on which employees might have those challenges. You said that you hoped employers would be considerate, but that doesn't give any legal protection. Do you think optimism is good enough?
No, I think it's very important that people are given the protections that they need, and we will. I think it's true that more women have been furloughed, but it's also true that the furlough scheme is more generous than virtually any other scheme around the world. And I can't think of any other country where people have been given 80% of their wages at up to £2,500 per month in the way that the UK has done. And we will continue to look after people, to put our arms around our workforce, to help them back into work. And Caroline, your point about the particular vulnerability of female workers is very good, because female workers, women workers, I think they have been harder hit by this thing, because very often they will have jobs, particularly lower paid jobs, that make it more difficult for them to work from home. And that's why we need to get this thing moving if we possibly can, keep fighting the virus, keep defeating it, and help people get back into work.
We went into this crisis with record female employment. That's a fantastic achievement. But in order to come out of it with women being able to go back into work, we're going to need a childcare sector that's functioning. What specific thought have you given about additional assistance to the childcare sector?
Well, we've already invested considerably in supporting childcare, as you know. It was in our and we will do whatever it takes to help women get back into work. And I think I agree with you. Childcare is absolutely critical for the success of our economy.
Specifically, how has the Government Equalities Office contributed to the decisions about which parts of the economy should open up first?
Caroline, we take every decision with full consideration for the equalities impacts, as you'd expect that any government department, any government does these days.
Thank you for that. Certainly, Bernard.
After you, sorry.
No, I just wanted to know, the Prime Minister commented earlier that he felt there had been enough female voices in the decision-making processes. Why have they not been more visible?
Well, when I said, I don't think I said enough, by the way. I just said that there'd been a lot. I think that it's certainly true that I'd like to have had more female representation in the press conferences so far. We've had Jenny Harries has been mentioned. Pretty has done a few. We will do our best, Caroline. And what can I say?
You made the distinction, Prime Minister.
Dido will be appearing this afternoon.
Can I just ask you, how much do you think having women in the room when decisions are being made actually changes the nature of those decisions?
I think you can make a huge difference. A huge difference. To be honest, that may sound like a vaguely sexist thing to say, but it's very important.
Prime Minister, you made the distinction between there being a lot of women and enough women. How many is enough?
Oh boy, this is that's a question on which I'm not competent to pronounce.
Is it not 50%?
It's not a joking matter, though, is it?
It's not. And all I say, Caroline, is that it's incredibly important to us, as Conservatives, and we have more. 50% would be great. We have large numbers of female MPs of great talent, including yourself, in the House of Commons now, far more than I believe.
You've made the point, Prime Minister.
And we have, and never forget, it's only the Conservative Party that's produced 2 female prime ministers.
Okay, well, we won't start on that.
Maybe you'll be the third.
Thank you very much, Caroline.
Thanks, Bernard.
Prime Minister, we're moving on to the final group of questions, and in many respects, the economy is the most important issue, because that's what's going to make the difference between people living in misery or prosperity as we come out of this. So I very much hope you will afford us a few extra minutes so that we can get these very important questions in. I will be extremely grateful to you. Mel Stride.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, Prime Minister. Prime Minister, in your response to Stephen Timms just now, in terms of addressing the importance of getting unemployment down as we come out of this crisis, you referred to your mantra, and you referred to doubling down basically on spending on training and apprenticeships and infrastructure, etc., all of which I think are important, incidentally. But you've also said in the past that austerity is not something that we're going to get involved with. And yet, what we do know is that the structural deficit will have increased very significantly as we come through the other side of this crisis. And whilst we may be able to borrow at low rates for some time, that will be predicated on a clear and credible plan that the markets believe in for getting that structural deficit down. Given your stance on spending, that means significant increases in the overall tax burden in this country, does it not?
Well, Mel, I think I understand exactly where you're going with your question, but I think you're just going to have to wait, and if you can, until till Rishi Sunak, the Chancellor, brings forward his various proposals. And you make an important point about the potential this country has to borrow at good rates and to invest in infrastructure, amongst other things.
We didn't have to wait, though, Prime Minister, when it came to basically saying there will be no return to austerity. In other words, that spending at pre-crisis levels will be broadly maintained. So what is your statement now on taxation? Is it, we'll have to wait and see what the numbers look like, or is it, well, you can give a similar assurance that, broadly speaking, taxes will remain at the same kind of level as they were?
I think I would share your instincts, Mel, to try and keep taxes as low as we conceivably can, consistent with our desire to invest in our fantastic public services. But I don't want to anticipate what we're going to do on our economic package. That's for a bit later on. If I may say so, just Bernard said just now that the most important thing was the economy. Yes, of course, but we won't have a strong economy unless we can get coronavirus under control, unless we can continue with our roadmap and defeat it. And that is, I think, what we should focus on right now.
Okay. Can I just zero in on one particular group that are being particularly damaged by the economy, and they've already been referred to by Rob, and that's young people. There's no doubt they are bearing the brunt in terms of job insecurity, job losses, the effect on their lifestyles and living standards and so on. And we need to do a lot, as you've recognised, to support them as we come through this crisis. Now, at the same time, if we go back to spending, one of the big spending commitments that you have in the manifesto here is the triple lock around pensions. And in fact, as an MP that represents an elderly constituency, if I may put it that way, I think that's very important. But can you today give us a categorical assurance that that particular manifesto commitment will be met?
We're going to meet all our manifesto commitments, unless I specifically tell you otherwise, Mel. The manifesto you and I fought on is, and it's an important point, because we won't be blown off course. We will deliver 40 new hospitals. We're well on track to delivering 20,000 more police officers. We will recruit 50,000 more nurses, and heaven knows the need for those nurses has never been more apparent to our country. We're going to get on. We're going to get on with our program, and we've got a fantastic agenda for this country of uniting, levelling up, and that's not just what that means. Is investing in policy.
I'm sorry to get very quickly, but I want to keep it to tax. So just so we're very clear, no rises in income tax, VAT, insurance.
Yeah, hi, Mel. I think when you were doing your job, as you did it so well in the Treasury, I don't think that you would have made any kind of commitments, fiscal commitments in this kind of committee. But you know where my instincts lie, and they're very much the same as yours.
I was just picking up on that we will meet our manifesto commitments, which includes no increase in the rates of those particular taxes. They're very broad-based and heavy lifting, and that's quite a commitment to stick to if you're also not prepared to bear down on spending to at least some degree. Could I just ask a final question, which is, firstly to say, I think broadly the Chancellor has done a very good job actually in terms of stepping in and supporting the economy through this very difficult period with the furlough scheme, etc. But inevitably, by moving at such scale and at such pace, there have been gaps. And one of those relates to the self-employed who work through their own company and take self-employment income by way of a dividend. And that currently is not being allowed to contribute to the assessment of the amount of furlough that they should qualify for. HMRC say it's too complicated to do that. I suspect it's one of those areas that a hand reaching down from the top, such as yours, Prime Minister, could slice through the Gordian knot. Are you prepared to personally have a look at this and potentially help hundreds and hundreds of thousands of hardworking, self-employed people with their furlough?
Yeah, thanks, Mel. Look, I really do understand the needs of the self-employed in this time. It is tough. You're making a very good point about those who get income by way of a dividend. We will look at that, whether that can be set against the furloughs, which I think what you're proposing. Again, I think that when you look at in the round at what the UK is doing to look after our employees and self-employed, it's a pretty awesome package, and we mean it. But this particular extra cash, I will have to discuss with my friend next door.
I'm grateful. Thank you, Prime Minister.
Moving on, Darren Jones.
Thank you, Chair. Prime Minister, how much of the British economy do you expect to end up in some form of state ownership as a consequence of Project Birch?
Well, I can't give you a figure on that, Darren, but suffice it to say, I mean, getting back to what Mel, we're going through quite extraordinary economic times, and
no, I understand. I don't want you to repeat the answers you've given to my colleague, Mr. Stride, because of time. But to maybe extend the question for you, could you give us an idea about how the government will prioritise support across different sectors? Will Airbus or McLaren, for example, get different support to, say, the hospitality and tourism sectors, or will they all get the support that they need?
We will do, Darren, whatever is appropriate to each sector.
Yeah, Prime Minister, what is appropriate? That's my question.
I can't give you a hierarchy.
Okay. My second question, Prime Minister, at what level of unemployment do you think it's right for the government to intervene to provide pay or secure work for people after furlough payments have come to an end?
Well, we're going to do everything we can to get everybody, Darren, back into work.
Thank you for that answer. And to build on Mr. Stride's question, the self-employment income support scheme comes to an end this weekend, whilst furlough for employed workers continues until October. Why is that?
Well, we will, as we said, as I think the Chancellor said, when we announced the scheme for self-employed people, we will keep it under review, and we will do what we can.
Prime Minister, it's this weekend. It's this weekend that income gets cut off. People will have a lack of income from next week. Don't
forget that self-employed people already have the access to bounce back loans, and they, I think the last figures I saw were 15 billion has been lent on the bounce back loans. Income tax payments can be deferred till next year, and people are of course eligible for all sorts of other government support, including the more generous universal credit that and other things that I've already mentioned.
Prime Minister, universal credit is not generous, and it's unfortunate that you don't have an answer for those in self-employment whose income will be ending this weekend. Prime Minister, these questions were trying to get an idea of the scope of the government's ambition for supporting businesses in the economic recovery, and I'm afraid that your answers haven't been particularly instilling of confidence. Businesses, workers, unions and consumers will need to see that from you in order for them to return comfortably to work, school or the high street. Will you be bringing forward a full economic recovery package to this committee and to Parliament before the summer recess?
You can take it, Darren. I must say I respectfully disagree with what you said about this government's economic package for this country. I don't think there's any other country that has done anything like the furlough scheme. I think that even your colleagues on the Labour benches would accept that it's generous and it's right. And yes, in answer to the short answer to your question is yes, we will be bringing a full coronavirus post-corona economic recovery package to you and to everybody else in Parliament.
We look forward to that, Prime Minister. And just to clarify, I wasn't criticising the economic package. I was just highlighting the lack of confidence from the public and the government in lifting the lockdown restrictions. My last question, very briefly, Chair. Earlier in the session, you said to my colleagues that the allegations against Mr. Cummings were untrue. Could you set out specifically for this committee which allegations specifically were untrue?
Well, I've gone into that before, and I have really nothing to add on what I've previously said.
You didn't answer the question today, though, Prime Minister, about which allegations were untrue. Would you like to take this opportunity to do so?
I tell you why I don't want to go back into that, Darren, which is, as I said, I think repeatedly to other distinguished members of this committee, it is my strong belief that although I understand people's frustration, people's indignation with the whole business, believe me, I do. I think that what the country wants is for us to be focusing on how to go forward on the test and trace scheme that we're announcing today, on how we're going to protect their jobs, their livelihoods, and defeat this virus. And that, I think, is where the energies of all politicians of all parties should now be directed.
Well, thank you, Prime Minister. I'm grateful to your commitment today to bring that post-COVID economic package to this committee before the summer recess. We look forward to seeing it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I don't know if you're going to get it exclusively, Darren.
That's what you said. That's what you said, Prime Minister. It's on the record, and we look forward to seeing it.
As members of the House of Commons, you will be the benefit. You will get it, but I'm not. I'm not promising a world scoop to the liaison committee.
Well done, Darren. Thank you for your questions.
No, Darren. No.
Hugh Merriman.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, Prime Minister. With regard to quarantine for those coming into the UK from the 8th of June, can I ask you why now, when we're easing the lockdown and other countries are ending quarantine, and why not when we entered into lockdown?
First of all, second point first, the reason we didn't do it then was because the scientific advice was very clear that it would make no difference to the arrival of the epidemic, or vanishingly little difference to the arrival of the epidemic. It might delay it by a bit, but it would still come. The reason for doing it now is because across the world we're seeing the infection rates come down. They're coming down here in this country. What we don't want to see is reinfection from abroad, and we think a sensible quarantine scheme can help to prevent that, and that's what we're going to do from June the 8th.
Prime Minister, many have commented that a sensible regime would look at the countries and their R rate, and if it's below ours, then there should be no need for quarantine. Whilst that may not be possible for the 8th of June, will that be possible for the next 3-week period, which is the 29th of June, to allow those buying cheaper flights for their summer holidays, which have gone on sale today, to be removed from the threat of quarantine?
Yes, absolutely, Hugh. We want to make sure that we use the 3-week reviews to be sensible. We want to drive the R down as fast as we can in this country, and to have as sensible a quarantine scheme as possible to keep flows as generous as we can.
What will have to change between now and the 29th of June for these air bridges to be accepted?
We'll have to agree them with the other countries concerned, but we'll also have to make progress on our in tackling the disease, and we'll have to have evidence that the other countries are in at least as good a position as we are.
But that looks positive. What looks negative are those workers in the aviation sector, and I know British Airways, many of whom will be in your constituency, who are under threat of not only losing their job, if they retain it, having their terms and conditions slashed. Prime Minister, can I ask you, why is the furlough scheme called the Job Retention Scheme, when companies like BA can put their employees on furlough and then put them under threat of redundancy at the same time? Can this be changed?
Well, look, I be perfectly frank, I am concerned. I won't go into individual companies, but I am concerned about the way some companies are treating their workforce. And you're raising a very important point, Hugh. I want to see, this country is nothing without its workforce, its labour. We've got to look after people properly, and we will. And I'm well aware of some of the issues that are starting to arise. People should not be using furlough to just cynically to keep people on their books and then get rid of them. We want people back in jobs. We want this country back on its feet. That's the whole point of the furlough scheme.
And Prime Minister, you'll be aware that Willie Walsh, the chief executive of IAG, has tried for years to slash the terms and conditions of his staff, has failed because the staff have had enough power. They don't have the power now. Is there something that government or parliament can do to step in to stop this action before it occurs?
Look, Hugh, I'm aware of this issue, and we're actively looking at what we can do.
I'm grateful. Thank you.
Chairman of the Public Accounts Committee has a supplementary question. Muted, Meg.
Thank you, Chair. Prime Minister, you've been very clear throughout that you want to be focusing on the agenda. That you said, and I quote, you want to be very clear about what we want to do. You want to stress the vital message, stay at home if you can. And obviously this is vital for the economy to get back up and running. So are you concerned now that the message during lockdown was so unclear that your own advisor did the right thing, but the rest of us didn't understand what we could do?
No, Meg. I think that the message during lockdown was very clear, and people who had the virus, including my advisor, isolated for 14 days. People stayed at home, and
Prime Minister, you say this, but we've all been contacted by many people who've been living in very difficult circumstances who didn't know they could do what your advisor did. And if that's the level of clarity of the message, aren't you concerned that going forward, this is going to cause a real problem as you expect the economy to get back up and running?
And I think that the most important thing now is for everybody to focus on the next steps, and for everybody to look at the test and trace scheme. Probably it won't affect you. You probably won't be contacted. But if you are contacted and you are told that you've been in contact with someone.
Well, Prime Minister, that's a different thing to my question. So perhaps it's not really answering my question, but back to the chair.
And Meg, if you're saying that the message was so unclear, or is so unclear, I really dispute that. Actually, I'm looking at the figures every day. We're seeing continual compliance of a fantastic level by the British public, because they understand, we all understand, that defeating this virus requires common sense, and it's working. And it was thanks to the British public working together that we prevented the overwhelming of the NHS. And I remember, I was looking back at my notes for early March, we were terrified that we were going to run out of ventilators, the NHS would collapse. That didn't happen because people followed the advice.
Well, Prime Minister, I mean, my question was about the clarity of messaging going forward.
Thank you. Can I, Yvette, if you've got one sentence, I will forgive you.
Very quick follow-up to the question from Hugh Merriman about the decision not to have quarantine at the borders in the early stages of the crisis, Prime Minister. We obviously heard from Patrick Vallance, who said many cases came in from Italy and Spain during that period. And we were told by Professor Wilder-Smith that between 1,000 and 10,000 people with coronavirus came in that period. You still haven't published the scientific advice that you were given for that decision. Will you now publish that advice, please?
Yes, and I think what Patrick has said is that all the advice is from SAGE is going to be published, including the SAGE minutes, Yvette. And I just go back to what I said in answer to Hugh about the decisions going into the virus. I mean the epidemic on quarantine, on closing borders. Don't forget, Italy closed its border completely to China and yet had an appalling outbreak. Our advice was that all it would achieve very little by way of epidemiological protection. It could only delay, and that there were other reasons why it was essential.
Yvette, I'm sorry. But Prime Minister, did you finish that point?
Yes, and there were reasons, for instance, for repatriating UK nationals, for making sure that we had access to medical supplies from overseas. We needed to keep aviation going. But Yvette, people will study all these decisions. I'm sure they will, and maybe they will find fault with them. But I can tell you they were taken in good faith, with the intention to defeat the virus and save lives, and they're on the best possible scientific advice.
Prime Minister, may I just ask, how will quarantining not retard the recovery of the economy?
Well, I hope it will not retard the recovery of the economy, Bernard, by helping to prevent reinfection, which could lead to a second outbreak, and the R going over one again in such a way as to do serious economic damage to necessitate another lockdown. That's the logic.
But you understand the conflict. May I just raise 2 points from absent colleagues? Obviously, we had far more demand to be in this meeting than we could accommodate. Julian Knight, the chairman of the DCIS committee, particularly concerned about the hospitality industry and charities, which we haven't had time to address.
And what?
And charities.
Charities, yeah.
What can you say about the hospitality industry and charities?
Well, on the hospitality, Julian should know that we're really trying to go as fast as we can. It is very difficult to bring forward hospitality measures in a way that is socially involves social distancing. But I'm much more optimistic about that than I was. And I think that we may be able to do things faster than I previously thought. Charities, I think we put very concerned, £750 million from my memory to support the charitable sector during what is obviously a very, very tough time, and we'll be trying to help them.
And the chair of the Defence Committee laments the sense that there is a capable HQ for this crisis, where I would suggest that there needs to be constant reviewing and learning on a comprehensive scale. It seems to take a long time for lessons to be learned and things to be changed because such an HQ does not exist. What would you say to that?
I don't agree with that. I think that actually what we've now got in here in number 10 is an operation, a COVID response operation led by Simon Case, who's very distinguished civil service that I'm sure is familiar to the committee. He's looking not just at the health aspects, but at the economic recovery aspects as well, bringing it together across Whitehall. And obviously, we have a structure that you will understand the various ministerial groups that work towards the decisions that we take. When we take these decisions every morning, there's a meeting here chaired by me. We have all the key players. We look at the data for the day. We work out where we are and what needs to be done that day. We share it with cabinet colleagues when we need to get to a decision. If cabinet approves, that then goes to the devolved assemblies, to the devolved administrations, to the opposition parties with whom we've been working very closely, and we then, once we've all got to a place where we're confident that we're in the right place, we go public with it. And so tomorrow, I'm hoping that we'll get to a state where we can announce further steps forward, further measures in step 2 of the roadmap. And you've heard a bit already about retail, about schools. We hope there'll be a little bit more to come as well. But it all depends on fighting that virus, following our common sense, and making sure that we stay alert, and everybody knows what the critical things are. We can't take these steps forward if the infection rates start to go up again, and if the R goes up again. I think everybody's got that.
Well, I thank you, Prime Minister, and thank you for taking so many questions. We've covered quite a broad waterfront. Your track and trace proposals, I think the salient points that I would take away about speeding up testing, educational inequalities arising from the COVID crisis, the unequal effect of the crisis on women, particularly women with children, the dividends point raised by the Chancellor, which seems to be a lacuna in the business support package. And
raised by Mel.
Yes, indeed. Did I say somebody else? I apologise. But
you promoted him to Chancellor. But anyway.
Well, I'm sorry. But I mean, I think this all underlines how much I think this has been of great benefit for the public to understand what is going on, and for the public to see Parliament holding you to account on these matters. I really do think it would be a benefit if we could see you again before the summer results.
I knew you were going to say that. Oh, I could see you were working yourself up to there again. Bernard, I'm just going to repeat the answer I gave at the very beginning, which is that we're working flat out to defeat coronavirus, to get our country back on its feet. I think it is very important. I have enjoyed this session. I think it's very important for us to try to, and been difficult though some of the questions have been, I think it's very important for us as parliamentarians to share ideas and to discuss things together in the way that we have in the last 90 minutes or so. The trouble is it does take a huge amount of Sherpa time, of preparation time, but we will do what we can, Bernard. We will do what we can.
Just point out the questions where you've hesitated and decided to go away and think are some of the most positive answers you've given in some respects, and that's where we want to help. And I hope that you will come back soon.
Okay, well, that's
my colleagues for being very disciplined and so helpful in this session.
Thank you.
Order,
Thank you.
Order.
Thank you.